Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it may be across the nation or around the world. Once again, you're listening to the VMware Communities Roundtable podcast. This is podcast number 636. My name is Eric Nelson. With me today, I have my regular co-host, Matt Lungeth. Today is Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023. Matt, how's it going today?
Eric, I'm continuing to be a running fool. My pursuit towards that 5K coming up here in the middle of the March is, sadly, continuing forward. My legs, body, and just general disposition is most certainly feeling it. But nevertheless, here we are. More importantly, sir, how are you doing? How are things out there on the West Coast? And most importantly, what is the color of the bay today?
Matt, I just have one follow-up question. For your quest for the running, is there a particular female involved with this quest?
No, not really. I mean, there's always Callie there is my significant other, and she has been very supportive of this. But not since the middle of December, for whatever reason, I have run through, forgive the pun, a 7-day-a-week workout cycle that goes between strength training, rowing, a little bit of cycling, and then treadmill work. And then the treadmill work, as of late in preparing for the 5K, has progressed from the treadmill to, heaven forbid, actually running outside like the fool that I am. So
kudos to you.
I would encourage anyone that has thought about that out there in the community. I was never a runner. I was never someone that was into, big time physical activity on any type of regular regimen. And I have noticed significant both physical and mental health differences. So it's in your power. If a couch potato like me can do it, I'd encourage anybody else to get on that bandwagon.
Awesome. Well, let me tell you, in California, we've had a windstorm come through, knock down trees all day yesterday and part of today. I was out in my Jeep and I had to go around 3 different trees in the area to get through. So we've just had cold, windy weather, gusts 60 to 70 miles an hour in the Bay Area, which is enough to take out power all over the place and take down some trees. So, it has been an interesting time, but the weather is beautiful and we've had plenty of rain. We're still getting rain. Reservoirs are full up. And so California will be out of the drought. At least out of water shortages, which is fantastic. On the show today, we have Niels Hagoort. We're going to be talking about VMC-A, the new instance type, and we're going to talk to Niels about the new instance type. There's some nice new features in what's coming out on the platform, and so Niels will come and share what new features are going to come out in this new type on VMC and AWS. So Niels will be here, but before we do Niels, Matt, as always, the fun part of February coming into March is that we start planning seriously for VMworld, or put another dollar in the cup, VMware Explore. And it looks like it's going to be kind of
that tip jar. I mean, it's getting significant these days. I mean,
I'm just going to write a 10K check. That should cover me the rest of my life, right? We'll just put it in the kitty and, buy everybody shirts or something. And that way I can just call it VMworld for the rest of time, right? But so excited about that, Matt. We've been doing planning, and what I would say this year is that travel budgets are going to be kind of interesting and tight as we've been kind of in a little bit of recession. I'm hoping by the time we roll around to VMware Explorer, things will loosen up a bit. And so start doing your planning early if you're gonna show up. It's going to be a fun community event. We're working with the event team. They've been working directly with us. It's in US. It's going to be in Vegas this year in the Venetian, which if you've ever been to the Venetian, it's a beautiful hotel.
Have the dates been announced? Do we know the dates for those that are out there to be planning?
August 21st through the 24th in Vegas. So August 21 through 24, which is, I think, a little bit earlier. Yeah, that's like about a week earlier than sometimes we've had it. Usually it's 28th through September 3rd. This is 21 through the 24th at the Venetian. And then Explore Europe is November 6th through the 9th in Spain at the standard conference center there. So, that's fairly regular. So should be exciting. Looking forward to the US one back in Vegas. You can get $25 rooms at the Excalibur. Not a bad room for $25 a night. If you get a cheap flight, you can be in and out of VMworld with only a $500 or $600 cost. And then of course you have the ticket price, right? Depending on whether you can get a session accepted or become a blogger and, get a blogger invite. There are ways to get in without paying that $2,000 price tag for the
start early. If you're self-funding, for those that have been out there, myself included, that have had to do it, start early, book that hotel reservation, just like any other trip, and monitor your flight costs. Historically, the earlier you book, sometimes that's the better. You can always, I would say, look to see if there would be price concessions, but the longer you wait, the more the expensive that's out there. And Eric, as you had mentioned, if you're looking for that pass where, the company's not reimbursing you, or you don't have that ability to use credits that are out there within your VMware account, there is other ways to do so. If you have an interest, reach out to your local vExpert, reach out to your TAM, reach out to a vExpert Pro, and we can talk about the ways to get you there.
Yeah, that's right. If you are in self-funding mode, the other thing is the last 2 years, because of the pandemic, it was a little trickier. They are going to open up more passes for bloggers this year. So there will be traditionally 100 passes for bloggers that we deal with. The pandemic that brought that down to like 25, right? So, but now, we're back in the game, full stop. So we will have additional passes for VMware Code. We used to give passes if you were doing a technical, developer session. We're going to try to bring some of that back. So there will be more flexibility in us helping people out where, the last 2 years, it was basically, we didn't have much leeway what we could do. I think this year will be a bit different, and I'm planning accordingly. So yeah. Yep.
Speaking of changes, I understand that there might be some venue differences as it comes to some of the community sites or community areas that we have previously known before.
Yeah, the funny thing about the show has always been that VMUG was always, an independent org that was wherever they were. They were a lot of times in the expo hall, and then maybe one area upstairs, third floor somewhere. We had the Champions program. The Champions program was somewhere else. Then we had the Code and vExpert program. We were somewhere else. This year, we're trying to bring all that together so that we'll have a village of sorts, so that you should be able to go, and with that should be some momentum of giveaways and things that we're doing together. So it should be fun. I think this year we'll actually have a village at the events where everybody can hang out and maybe do some fun, cool things. The event team has recognized, and maybe some of Broadcom has recognized, that community is super important. I was talking to one of my friends who works at IBM. He's a director there, runs community, Marius, and he used to work at VMware. And Marius says that Broadcom has been a big investor in community. In fact, they compete with sponsorships. So IBM tries to out-sponsor Broadcom, and Broadcom always wins because they come in with like $500,000 and outbid IBM for community sponsorship events. So apparently Broadcom is a big investor and understands community more than even we've talked about in the past. So that was an interesting story from Marius. So yeah, should be a great environment, and pulling it all together and investing in community. And then they are doing these, sessions with the experts and champions and VMUG to try to figure out what else we can be doing to highlight community content, get more community content into Schedule Builder. And so definitely rotating the community knob to the right here, which is good. So fun times. With that, let's get on with the show. I can't wait to talk to Niels. So Niels, we always start with tell us who you are, how long you've been in the IT industry, and how long you've been at VMware, and what do you do? We're a community podcast, so we like to spend a few minutes talking to you and who you are.
Yeah, obviously, fine. It's first of all great to be on the show. I've been a fan about the whole VMware community in itself, actually. So I've been in this space for about 20 years. First started off as your typical Windows engineer, going after the MCSE certification track, did all that, and I believe somewhere in 2007, 2008, actually started working with VMware solutions. So obviously we had around ESXi 3.0, 3.5 maybe. We started fooling around with it a little bit. Obviously witnessed vMotion, which has been a topic that I talk a lot about in presentations nowadays still. Worked our way up to ESXi 4 because that was actually the first version where we released a distributed switch, I believe. And I was working with my team on a large ISP, an internet service provider here in the Netherlands. And distributed switch changed how we actually could provide a sort of IaaS service to our customers, because now we have consistency across all of these hosts. So fell in love with VMware basically back then. Went to the first VMOC here in the Netherlands, which is actually pretty close to my hometown, around, what was it, 2014, I think. That was the same time when I actually started blogging. And that VMOC, that changed my career path, I guess, because now all of a sudden I witnessed all these guys standing on stage, sharing knowledge, that whole community aspect, right? So I needed to do my part. I felt like it. So started blogging, started visiting my first VMworld actually in 2014. And it blew my mind. The number of sessions, everybody there just meeting up with peers, talking about what you see in your daily life when it comes to VMware solutions. It was definitely such a great experience. And since that VMworld, I actually never skipped another VMworld. So I've been lucky enough to do all the VMworlds and now explore, obviously, for both US and Europe since then. Started actually to present at the local VMUGs as well. Over the years, started to add more VMUGs across Europe. And again, be lucky enough to do a lot of VMUGs in the US, for example, as well. Met up with another fellow Dutchie. Well, we refer to ourselves as Dutchies, but folks from the Netherlands who actually helped me with a couple of things, because I did presentations, I was blogging, I started working with a couple of buddies of mine on the VCDX certification as well. So in 2015, I had my defense in the UK in Staines, our EMEA head office for VMware.
Niels, who was on your defense panel?
Oh, Thomas Voita and two others who I can't remember anymore. It's been a while, Matt. Sorry, I'm not that good with names, to be honest. But hey, especially Thomas, he was asking me some pretty gnarly questions, and it was, in hindsight, it was a great experience. But I remember being pretty nervous just before my defense.
And if I may ask, was your scenario based on a customer or real world implementation, or was it more mock?
No, and it was definitely based on a customer implementation that I was working on. And I've been active as a VCDX mentor for quite some years after the fact. And that was always one of the key questions, Matt. Because if you do it, if you're actually actively working on a project with a customer, it makes life easier, because now you really need to think through constraints, business requirements, and all of that stuff. And yes, you can do it with a fictional deployment as well, but I would argue that it makes life a little bit more difficult on that front.
Certainly, right? You know what the customer's responses are going to be in many instances, and how, in the customer asking questions, what the questions that might come from the panel in regards to certain scenarios or configurations or constraints or limitations.
Exactly. And customers have the craziest business requirements out there, right? So you need to work around those as well, and that makes it fun as well. Like I mentioned, in hindsight, it was fun. Right before the defense, it honestly wasn't because of nerves. But okay, I managed to get VCDX, and then I started at a large telco company and really focusing on the performance within ESXi, because they were virtualizing a voice over LTE platform. And I needed to dive deep into vSwitches, how to tune ESXi, all of that stuff. That led me to meet up with a buddy of mine, Frank Denneman, who is also living in the Netherlands here. And at one point, he was working a lot with NUMA and memory within ESXi. At one point, we decided to actually write this all down in a book. So in 2016, we co-authored both the host resources deep dive book. That book led to some meetings with my first role in VMware, because I was working as a freelance contractor at that stage. So I actually had a nice deal with a technology partner to give away some books at the Indianapolis VMUG in 2018, if I recall correctly. And luckily, after some previous tries for me to actually start working for VMware, because I wanted to join a mothership, right? And I did all that presentation blogging. I wanted to do that for my daily job if the scenario would present itself. And luckily it did, because I met up with Adam Eckerly, now at Rubrik, but was able to join his team, which was such a great experience, because now it's actually your daily job and your responsibility to dive into ESXi, all of that stuff that I've already been working on. So that was great. As I mentioned, did quite some VMUG presentations, VMworlds, and just, I believe, 2017, co-wrote the latest version still of the clustering deep dive book together with Frank and Duncan, because there was a series that they had around for quite a while. It's due for an update, definitely, because that's still vSphere 6.7, I believe. So yeah, and then worked tech marketing for vSphere ESXi, everything resource management, hardware accelerators, you name it, lifecycle, all good stuff. And then moved to the VMware Cloud and AWS team in 2021, the end of it, I believe. And that was interesting itself, because it's still vSphere, but running on top of a hyperscaler, basically, right? And that led to a lot of interesting takes on it. I focus a lot on migration because I like vMotion. Actually, when talking about vMotion, I'm currently writing a book together with an engineer about vMotion specifically. But that all applies on-prem for vSphere on-prem, but also for VMware Cloud, because once you run VMware Cloud on whatever hyperscaler, it makes life easy to migrate into that, right? We can use HCX, we have advanced cross vCenter vMotion, but when we are talking live migration, it's always vMotion logic that comes into play. So I can jab around this topic forever, but that's that's the career path till now.
Yeah, it is interesting. And, I've been explaining to people, when you talk about multi-cloud and you talk about, where VMware is going, it's like, I try to build the analogy, and you can decide if this is right or not, is, ESX and vSphere allowed you to build this plane across multiple racks of hardware, right? And then all of a sudden your VM was free to move from one rack to another, and the hardware was abstracted, right? And I don't see anything different in the cloud environment, except instead of racks of hardware, you're just looking at, hyperscaler data center instances, right? But you're still doing motion of of your compute loads across racks of hardware, right, that are now just sitting at different hyperscaler companies, right? And so I look at that and going, if we can create a vSphere, a multi-cloud vSphere that allows you to do that same activity, I don't see any difference in the behavior of what our software offers, customers.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like this slightly different abstraction layer that we created, because we did so for hardware, to your point, right? We virtualize compute, networking, storage, all of that.
Right.
And we do the same thing for public cloud or hyperscalers, as they call them as well. Yeah.
Right. And I now it gets a little tricky when you then start talking about the app itself and whether the apps have, interfaces built into what type of interfaces Amazon gives you. They give you when you go to reInvent now, there are hundreds of sessions of APIs that they'll deliver for you that you can then embed in your application. And if you embed your application, now all of a sudden moving your application from one hyperscaler to another, you get lock-in based on the APIs that you're consuming from these guys. So it's not as easy because sometimes there is API lock-in, but assuming you're smart enough not to do that to your app, then that vision holds true.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of like the fact that I was at reInvent for the first time last year, actually. Wow, that was a crazy large event.
Yeah, eye opener when you go there.
If you haven't been to reInvent before, the scale of it is
immense. It is. Yeah, I like you were talking about Explore this year being back at Las Vegas. I think that is great. Venetian even. I kind of like Mandalay as well, but Venetian is definitely a nice place to be at. reInvent is the Venetian Palazzo. It's partially Mandalay, MGM. It's all over the strip. It's insane.
Yeah, it is. But I see our value in abstracting out the hardware layer at the big cloud providers, right? Hyperscalers. So yeah, I like that. So getting into now your experience of people putting workloads on VMC, right? I mean, it's a real thing. We have big customers doing it now. What's your thoughts? I mean, we're going to talk about the new release that's coming out. What's your thoughts on how it works for customers and the traction there with regard to your perspective? And then we'll talk about, the new features that are coming from, Cloud Flex computing environment that's out there to other pieces and storage that's coming. So we'll start in with, maybe 3 or 4 minutes of your industry assessment of VMC now. And then we can talk about features specifically.
Niels, in a follow-up to that, I also kind of want to frame this for our listeners is the current state of VMC, right? We think of this as an IaaS platform within the hyperscalers. We have it out there for GCP. We have it out there for Azure and whatnot. And above and beyond bare metal that now we have spun up our SDDC stack on, what is the current capabilities or extensions of capabilities now that we have the SDDC deployed on these bare metal instances? What's within the purview? What are we able to do as far as these workloads? What extensions do we have out there? What are we able to do as far as automation and life cycling and redundancy within those bare metal instances? The state of the union, if you will, for VMC.
That's fair. And there's quite a lot, actually. Okay, so where to start? First of all, I like the fact that we've been talking about migration, maybe a lock-in if you actually have an API lock-in maybe for a specific workload. Talking to a lot of customers, what they didn't realize when we started with this service, because this was the first hyperscaler that we supported, right? And at the background, this is actually our service. So VMware's our own service, which we jointly engineered with AWS, obviously. All the other hyperscalers, we work closely together with them. That is a jointly engineered service as well. But looking at Google, looking at Azure, looking at Alibaba, looking at Oracle, IBM, all of these it's the partner, their service, and we are supporting it. So it's the other way around. So that is interesting, I think. Customers, when we first launched this in 2017, I believe, we only started with a couple of AWS regions where this is actually possible to deploy your software-defined data centers, your SDDCs. I would argue that traction was a little bit slow because moving into cloud is, well, it's scary, right? And it took a while for customers to understand, look, hey, this is actually pretty easy to do. And I always tell customers, well, you have certain workloads that might fit better on edge, on-prem, or on a different hyperscaler maybe. VMware Cloud on AWS is not for everybody. And that is actually what I like about VMware Cloud as our multi-cloud strategy, if you will, because you're not pinned to one specific deployment. I have had customers who are moving workloads from an on-prem infrastructure into VMware Cloud on AWS. But hey, guess what? That database backend, we still have some local connections that we need to have. It probably sits better on-prem, and they move it back, right? So there's this back and forth that you can actually do with workloads. And I showcase this all the time. I do
think about that if
we'd
have to, if that customer would refactor the DB entirely to a native AWS instance, right? We don't have that ability to test, the data locality. Whereas if it maintains within our, let's call it hypervisor platform, regardless of whether that's on-prem or on one of these hyperscalers, if it doesn't work, it's a vMotion away.
Exactly. It is that easy. And I was saying that I show this all the time. There's obviously a lot of dependencies here as well from a networking security perspective, but given a workload, just a plain good old workload, it's easy enough to move them across hyperscalers, even if you want to with VMware Cloud, but also back into on-prem models, if you will. So I think that is a really strong thing that we have going on with VMware Cloud and VMware Cloud on AWS specifically, maybe. The other thing is that it started to get a little bit more easy for customers to have the benefits of public cloud as well. So obviously there is global reach. Within your data center, you're basically pinpointed to one specific location. Maybe you have multiple data centers. We have customers that have an office, for example. So a company based in the US and they have an office in Australia, for example, or something APJ. In the APJ region, it's easy enough to spin up a SDDC close to that location. So there's that as well. And obviously you need subscriptions. This is not a free service, right? So you need to pay for it.
Think of the alternative, right? Where you would be either physically building out infrastructure or co-loing, right? Within a local service provider. And of course that might be an option, but for that expandability, right? And especially if they have done that before in an existing AWS region, right? We can duplicate some of those best practices and configurations to then duplicate that VMC instance in another availability zone.
Exactly. And we have constructs within NSX because, well, a little bit of a step back. It's good to understand that once you instantiate an SDDC with VMware Cloud on AWS, you'll get the full works, the vSphere, obviously our beloved ESXi hypervisor, running on top of a bare metal host, right? So there's typically customers ask me if there's a middleware in between. There's nothing. There's the EC2 instance from AWS. We run ESXi directly on top of it. There's vSAN for your default data store and NSX. Those three make up, especially NSX, that we have a lot of flexibility on connectivity. So not only connect your on-prem into VMware Cloud on AWS instance, for example, but think about that scenario we were just talking about. When you have multiple SDDCs across the globe, we have some nifty stuff to really do efficient networking in between those SDDCs. So
there's your POP for edge services for that particular region.
Exactly. So fast forward from 2017, where we launched the service, where we are today, is obviously.
How many availability zones are we in now?
Ooh, the exact number. We are in 22 regions, and each and every region having approximately 4 availability zones. It's quite a lot. And actually, it's funny when you really start looking into those region availability zones, because these are still data centers, right? Obviously, AWS data centers, but within a region and availability zone, it's actually separated data centers where you're running in. So One of the cool things talking about availability zones here is that we have some availability features that customers can actually benefit from with VMware Cloud on AWS. And that is so one of the key constructs within vSphere is vSphere HA, vSphere High Availability, right? So in an on-prem world, if a host fails, those workloads running on that specific host will get restarted on surviving hosts.
In the order that you can specify, that depending on that application package, if you will, or application stack, that to properly stood back up in the correct order, so services are there and available for the, let's call it end user stack or end user application stack.
Exactly. So we use all of that in VMware Cloud on AWS as well. But when you think about availability, typically clusters are designed to withstand depending on cluster size, obviously, but an X number of hosts before availability actually becomes compromised. Availability of those workloads running inside of the cluster. With VMware Cloud on AWS, you don't necessarily need to run into your on-prem or your co-located data center to replace that host or fix that host. Once we see a HA event triggered, because it could still be that a EC2 instance fails, we automatically jump in a new fresh host, make sure that the availability, if you sign up basically for a 8-node cluster or SDDC, we make sure that availability is guaranteed. So that is one of the nifty things that we can do with VMware Cloud on AWS compared to on-prem. And we talked a little bit about elasticity as well, how you scale out. Well, guess what? We have our beloved DRS, and within VMware Cloud on AWS, we have elastic DRS. So setting policies, you can actually automatically scale your cluster once you reach a certain threshold for storage or compute, stuff like that.
If I'm building this by the book, right? If we're doing a prod instance, I know that the minimum number of hosts right now is 3, I believe, because of the witness requirement. 2?
Yeah, we do some. You only have to pay for a 2-host SDDC. And we can still. Oh, wait a minute! You're talking stretch clusters, or?
Well, let's just say if there's a 2-part question with this. One, what's the minimum number of hosts if I would be doing a POC? And then you had mentioned 8 hosts as far as a instance that was out there if we would have an HA event. If I'm building this by the book for a prod cluster within an availability zone within a region, what's the now recommended number of hosts should I want to put production workloads on it? So 1, what's the new minimum? And 2, what's the minimum for what you would consider to be production workloads?
Hey, there's no easy answer, Matt. The typical IT answer, I guess. It depends.
Right. Well, let's say, what do you see as the most common?
So first of all, with VMware Cloud, we make sure that we have the adequate HA admission control policy set up for you. So you don't need to even worry about that. We have fixed SLAs. With an on-prem environment, it really depends on the number of hosts in your specific cluster. It's what I said before. It really depends. There's no fixed number that I see. I know what we do on the back end with VMware Cloud on AWS, and that is still a percentage-based. What most of the customers were using, I think, today, because the other options, dedicated failover hosts or stick with a slot size, that typically takes a little bit too much effort into actually calculating what you need available in that specific host. So the percentage based is definitely the way to go in a lot of scenarios, I would argue, and we do the same thing for VMware Cloud on AWS. Now, to your first question about the number of hosts that you actually need for a POC, for example, we do some magic that you can start with on 1 host SDDC actually. So that is interesting because, well, we are talking vSAN still, but we can do vSAN on a single host. Obviously, this is without any SLA or whatever. This is just a proof of concept, just a 60-day period. And after that 60-day period, that 1 single host will get decommissioned automatically. So it's a fixed time, but we have one host opportunities for customers to do POCs. Now, the minimum number of a production SDDC can already be a 2-host cluster, right? Still, you need to think about the actual resources that are available to you, because if you instantiate your first SDDC, part of that first cluster within that SDDC that you're spinning up, even though it's only 2 hosts, is that you need room to accommodate the management cluster. So we need resources for vCenter server appliance, NSX appliances, potentially.
What we had an on-prem, right? If we're doing this by the book, is we have our workload domains and we have our management domain, right?
Exactly.
That concept still applies, regardless of whether we're out on a hyperscaler or not.
Exactly. So this is an interesting topic, because we have some maximum numbers. 8 is definitely not the maximum number for a per cluster host count. I believe a soft limit is in place around 16 hosts per cluster. And that is, like I mentioned, a soft limit. We have a lot of customers running larger clusters on this. But the 2 hosts start for a typical SDDC. Before I almost forget, we were talking HA. I quickly wanted to mention that we can do something that AWS can do out of the box, which is stretch clusters, because we can have those availability zones. We were talking about that, right? And we can actually do, it's just tick in a box in the VMware Cloud Console, your web UI, or basically your entrance of the service. And when you create a SDDC, you can just hit the box stretch clusters. Yes, you would need double the hosts. Obviously, you need an even number of hosts. Because, well, if you're familiar with stretch clusters, right? Well, you two are definitely familiar. But if you're listening and you're not familiar, basically you have 2 availability zones in one cluster construct, where half of it can basically fail, and you would still have enough resources to make sure that all of the workloads get started. We can do that on top of VMware Cloud on AWS.
Is that limited to host within a region? So if we have availability zone 1 and 2 within a given region, right? I'm thinking.
I see where you're going here.
US East. Do we have the ability to do that across regions?
No, not in the stretch cluster form, because we're still bound to latency, stuff like that, for vSAN to be stretched as well. So no, that is within a region, but across different availability zones in that region. Those can still be like kilometers or miles from apart from each other, right? So you have that SLA that we up to, I believe, out of the top of my head, to 99.99% uptime SLA when it comes to stretch clusters, where typically with public cloud offerings, even with a single AZ SDDC on VMware Cloud on AWS, you get 99.9% SLA uptime guarantee. So that's definitely something of consideration for customers who really value their availability.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. But back to the point. Sorry for that brief stretch cluster stuff. The interesting topic here is the 2 hosts. How do I start small? And there are still quite some customers who are, where a 2 hosts is basically a little bit too much for a specific application or application set that they want to run in VMware Cloud on AWS.
And DR scenarios, burst capacity, they're just
exactly
touching their feet into the water that is a hyperscaler, right?
Exactly. And that is one of the reasons why we started working on Cloud Flex Compute. One of the things that we announced at last VMware Explore in San Francisco.
Let's talk about that. What is Cloud Flex Compute? Great marketing term, but for the customer, what does that actually offer them within this VMC SDDC deployment?
Well, it's a little bit more flexibility when it comes to compute resources. No, it's actually it is, right? It's the ability for customers to start a little bit smaller while still benefiting from VMware Cloud on AWS. So this is still very much in the works. We're having this early access program that we're actively working on right now.
Right. What we're talking about is EA, soon to be GA, but not generally available as of yet.
Exactly. And timelines, well, soon, right? But you know how it is with software development.
Blogs.vmware.com/cloud. I'm sure that the minute that it drops and goes GA.
Exactly. The minute, within a second, maybe even. But it is a really cool new addition to the portfolio, I would argue, because now you'll have a web UI. So you won't have a full vSphere client at your disposal, right? It is web-based, where you can instantiate or connect your content library, stuff like that, to instantiate your virtual machines on top of well, you could almost compare it to vCloud Director, basically, right? It's a little bit different on the back end, but from the main goals that we are trying to achieve is very similar from a customer perspective. So you have your dedicated pool of compute resources, both CPU, both memory, and you'll have the ability to store probably get a fixed capacity of storage. You get some public IPs if necessary, or you just use VPN constructs like that, and you're good to go. Nothing fancy, really easy to set up, and it gives you that ability, like I mentioned, to start working with VMware Cloud on AWS, but at a very smaller portion, if you will, without the overhead of your management cluster, etc. Because that was one of the big pain points of smaller customers running on top of VMware Cloud on AWS.
Yeah, and Matt, we're constantly trying to figure out how to give vExperts some instance of our software in AWS, and we've been having that conversation with the VMUG board as well. Like, how do we get community members that used to get unlimited licenses to our software and still do, but then when you start talking cloud service, all of a sudden there's a cost to it. It's very difficult to give people. And this feature, which we've been talking about, preparing for the release of this, something that allows us to give entry-level community members some cloud experience, right, without having it break our bank, right? And this is one of the things we're actually excited about, because we might actually get some resolution when it comes to getting people cloud experience without it costing so much, and an easier way into the platform. So we're actually excited about it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Eric. I actually need to connect you guys to the product management who is working on this specific offering, because it would be interesting to get insights from vExperts as well on this specific platform, right? It's very much on the development. And well, once the first version,
we have talked to some product. They have given us those dates, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to say anything because I kind of know the roadmap. So we do have some time to work and pull this together. So yeah, we're gonna definitely do that. Yeah, we're excited about it, because we might actually, me and Corey and Matt have been talking about how to solve this for about 3 years now, right? Ever since we basically got into the cloud business. So yeah, this could be something that allows us to make that happen.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. So that is an essential flex compute model, right? There are other things that are coming out in the in the releases that are coming in. I always struggle with, like, what does a release mean? How like, it's a cloud service. Like, I struggle with every time I go to a browser and show up at a SaaS service, it's all a little bit different. And so the idea of releases now are always a little bit challenging. You know how I know there's a new release? Something breaks. That's how I figure it out. We're like, oh, they must have updated and they broke something, go file a ticket. They're usually responsive of getting it fixed. What's the, I know we're coming out with these new releases. This is particular package, VMC-A, in a new instance type. What else do we expect to be seeing here?
So yeah, Cloud Flex Compute, we talked a little bit about that. We have instance types, to your point, the I4I instance type, basically replacing the first instance type that we were using. With AWS, you get certain EC2 bare metal instances, right? We have i3EN for storage capacity heavy workloads, and now the new I4I. So running the latest Intel, the third generation Intel Xeon package, a lot more compute power. So we're actually actively working to get customers from an older i3 model into a new i4i model. So that is one. The other one is another interesting ask when it comes to cloud consumption. Can I scale storage separately from compute? Because with vSAN is great, right? But if you need more storage capacity, you need to add more hosts, and you may not need the computational power that comes with it. So we have a couple of options actually that we announced, and actually G8 as well, which is Cloud Flex Storage, which is, if you re-engineer it, it's sort of the Datrium file system that we use in AWS to instantiate NFS data stores without going into too much detail. And the other option is that we have NetApp FSx within AWS infrastructure, which we already could use in guest as an in-guest NFS mount, but we can now also mount that to ESXi hosts. So for that large file server backend, you can now scale storage separately from compute, which is, I think, something that was in high demand by our customers. So, and next to that, we continuously deploy new regions across the globe. Actually, we just G8 a new region in Africa, the first one in Africa, which is in Cape Town. And the Middle East is another big region for us, which we are planning in Bahrain to have an AWS region enabled for VMware Cloud on AWS. And there's tons of other regions. So things keep on developing. And especially last 2 years, I would argue, there's a lot of new stuff for this.
Niels, if I'm on an existing customer, my instances are i3, and I read through all of the new specs that are out there between the CPU availability, the additional RAM that I have for per host, the amount of storage that's been increased, and everything that comes with these i4i instances is attractive to me. How do I go about it? And I think about it in on-premises terms. It's a hardware migration, right? And everything that goes along with the hardware migration. But I see some distinctive advantages, since this is a IaaS service, and all of the orchestration that we have built into the back end to migrate those workloads. So can you walk us through how that, if I'm an existing i3i customer and I'm looking at i4, how does that process work?
That is a great question, Matt, because we haven't even touched lifecycle management for this platform, because that's one of the other big advantages. Customers don't necessarily want to fiddle around with ESXi upgrades, vCenter server upgrades. While we've made that better for on-prem, this is something that you don't even have to worry about with VMware Cloud, or in this specific case, VMware Cloud on AWS. So I'm actually working on a blog post right now and a VMAC presentation, which will be live for the upcoming virtual event on March 9, I believe, talking about under the hood lifecycle management for VMware Cloud on AWS. So to the question, we have a free of charge service, which is a cluster conversion service. And that is mainly because the i3 node, that is still running a Broadwell CPU package, for example, no hyperthreading enabled. It's not a really beefy host, right? So because that is end of sales, and eventually in a couple of years will be end of support, we are moving customers to the new i4i instance. And that is something that customers don't have to worry about as well. There's a couple of things on the subscription side of things that they need to worry about together with their VMware representative. But from a technical perspective, we are moving them from those older hosts into a new host. We do a lot of pre-checks, a lot of things on the back end.
If this would be greenfield, I'm a greenfield customer today, am I getting deployed on i3 or i4?
Well, the i3 is actually end of sales, so you would be deployed on i4i. That is definitely the go-to instance type today.
All right.
Yeah, but we have a lot of customers running on i3, and eventually during the year, that may take some time, we are moving those customers into i4i. And basically, without going into too much details, we add i4i hosts. We have i3 hosts in those clusters. We vMotion all the workloads, remove the i3 hosts, and there you are with your i4i instances. That is the short version of it. There's a lot that goes on in the background, but that's what customers are experiencing.
I'm assuming that in the back end that we are setting the VM hardware profiles so that the CPU compatibility between what is in i3 to i4 is seamless.
Yeah. Actually, that is an interesting topic in itself when we talk, for example, EVC, enhanced vMotion compatibility, and the usage of that in VMware Cloud on AWS, because we don't always enable that on a cluster level per se. And that has been an active discussion for this very topic as well. But yeah, that might be for a different episode.
Stay tuned to that upcoming blog post and VMUG presentation.
Yeah. That lifecycle stuff, that's actually really interesting how we do that, because it's still a SRE triggered process. And we use a lot of stuff that we have on-prem as well. Think about ESXi Quick Boot, for example. So we don't need a full power cycle of an EC2 instance. We just restart the ESXi kernel, and that's it. So a lot of these capabilities to speed up lifecycle management like you would on-prem, but now our SRE team does that for you with VMware Cloud on AWS. So I'll be putting that link out shortly once we've had that VMUG virtual event presentation beginning of March.
I know we're running at the top of the hour, and I believe, Matt, you have a hard stop. So let's, Matt, I'll give you a minute to do the wrap-up question. We'll talk another minute of eBarbecue, and we'll be done for today.
Niels, one, thank you for being with us today. And one of the things that we always ask our guests, are you out there on social media? And if you are, if a listener is interested in hearing these presentations and following along on your blog posts and maybe joining in on that VMUG presentation that's coming here in March, how do they go about following you?
Probably the easiest way on Twitter, which is the first letter of my first name and my last name. So N Hagoort. That's my Twitter handle.
NHAGOORT. NHAGOORT.
That's the one. For the VMUG side, it's probably the best place to find the details about that global virtual event. March 9th, and some of the other user cons that are coming up. I know I have some lined up in the Netherlands, in Denver, actually. I'm looking forward to be at Explore again this year as well.
I appreciate you running around, traveling to the different VMUGs. It's Gene Williams and myself are always looking at how are we getting advanced cloud topics to our VMUG community. So appreciate that. Yeah, sweet. Thanks a lot for being on the show. As always, we're at on YouTube, vBarbecue, BARBCUE. I don't know, barbecue. Go figure it out. But go there, give us a follow and a like. If you want to see what Niels looks like, you can go there and see his mug, so you know to say hello to him next time you see him. Niels, do you guys do barbecue? Are you in the Netherlands? Are you out of the Netherlands? And if so, do you do barbecue out there?
We definitely do barbecue, Eric. We don't get a lot of sun during the year, I would argue. We're very much like the UK in that aspect.
Now, do you call it ice barbecue? Is that what you do? You make ice?
Hey, you can barbecue in the snow as well if you want to, right? Or in the rain. I'm not sure if I'm really a barbecue connoisseur preparing barbecue myself, but I do have a very nice hamburger way of doing a hamburger, basically. I'm a sucker for a good burger. Right. And ribs. Oh, man. Now I'm kind of looking forward to summer.
Niels, where's your favorite burger place in the States?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah. I haven't been to Texas, so there's that. I kind of like Super Duper Burger in San Francisco. That's the one that stood out to me. In-N-Out. Yeah, sure. I'll take an In-N-Out as well. But I feel I'm lacking the experience of a real barbecue place in the US.
Do they smoke fish in the Netherlands? Do you guys get a lot of smoked fish?
Well, we smoke a lot in the Netherlands, but not fish. Well, no. That's another topic. No. Yeah, definitely we do. Yeah, I don't necessarily do that because I'm not that good at it. I think I'm good at eating it though, and I enjoy a good barbecue, even fish and smoked fish. Yes.
There you go. Well, thanks a lot for coming on the show. We're out of time. We'll be back again next week, Wednesday, noon to 1 every week. Niels, thanks a lot for showing up.
Thanks for having me.